Um, Good evening, everyone. I'm Eric Sterling, Chair of the Policing Advisory Commission. I called the meeting to order at 6:35. We have with us 5 members. We don't have Ruhama is going to be logging on now. Of course, she just texted me. So we are close to, is 6 does 6 give us a quorum?
Hold on just 1 second and I'll check.
Can't we listen out of quorum? We can,
Yeah.
I don't think we're voting on anything right away, are we? Unless I missed something.
No, well, correct. We're not going to vote on the minutes until, of course, we have a quorum. We're honored that Councilmember Will Jawando, who is the sponsor of Bill 1223, and his staff have made the time to come to speak with us and to answer any questions about the bill, to help us decide whether to take a position or what position to take as part of our responsibility to the council. So perhaps it would be best if I recognize Councilmember Jawando for his opening remarks regarding the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling, and good to see everybody. And thank you for the work that the PAC does. You know, as some of you may remember, I was a co-sponsor with Councilmember Reamer on the bill to create the PAC, and really have appreciated the thoughtful comments and work and deliberation of all of the members over the last several years. And just wanted to say that at the beginning. You'll have to forgive me. I'm a little jet lagged. I was on a trip to Nigeria with my family and just got back this afternoon. So after 10 days. So I might not be as articulate as you remember me, but I will try to slow down and get all the good information out. And we have Marisa from my staff who is on as well. There she is. Who handles criminal justice and public safety issues in the office and is a very intelligent lawyer herself, and joined our staff earlier this year. Marisa, or yes, I think
December.
so. Yeah, December late last year. So what I'll do and what I have, Eric, is that you guys want me to just give you an overview from my perspective of the top lines for we have all told for question and comment until about 30 minutes. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Okay,
great. So I'll spend, 10 or so to just try to give you the high level. And then if we turn to questions, does that work?
Perfect.
Okay. So, the STEP Act, well, backing up before that, you all know, as I mentioned, I co-sponsored this bill, but, the LED Act, the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act, which created independent investigations in police-involved deaths, was actually the first criminal justice reform bill ever introduced or passed on the county council in its history. And it was the first bill I introduced January 15th, 2019, after I was sworn in a few weeks prior. Partly in response to the death of Robert White, and that had happened just a year prior, who was the unarmed African-American gentleman who was walking in his neighborhood and ended up having a confrontation with an officer, was shot 7 times and killed. That bill was obviously much before the latest iteration of the nationwide conversation about how do we reimagine public safety and ensure that everyone feels safe, and that our police are a part of building and creating a community where everyone feels safe. And how do we make the proper changes to get there? Obviously, we had the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and you all were kind of a part of that. This commission was a part of that. How do we look at things to change, just like many of our systems and structures that are producing disparity and issues, particularly in certain communities? And how do we update and continually improve, upon a system of law enforcement and public safety that we should always be in continuous improvement on? So obviously, I'm not new to this issue or these sets of issues. And I come to this and I've said, I wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago in the Washington Post. I said, as part of our work to reimagine public safety, I think we need to do three things. We need to work on the input side. So who are we recruiting to be in our law enforcement agencies? How are they trained, right? And we just last week, I had a really cool moment, or 2 weeks ago, Marisa was there when we had the first session of the most recent recruits for our law enforcement agency had their first community informed police training that happened. That was a law that I recently passed and had introduced several years ago. And the first group cohort got the training, the week-long training delivered by law enforcement and academic professionals at Montgomery College and other places. And I got to speak to that group as they started off their week. An example of how are we equipping people with the right tools. They learned about the history of policing, de-escalation techniques, racial equity and social justice, emphasizing and reinforcing some things at the academy, but going deeper and from a different perspective, a non-law enforcement perspective. And that'll be improved and iterated upon, but the first one happened last week. So who are we recruiting? What are we paying them? I've consistently been in favor of higher pay and higher qualification. I voted for every police budget. I've supported the $20,000 in bonus and all that, because I think we should, just like teachers, I'm the chair of the education committee, we should have high standards. We should have high pay and high qualification. So that bucket of who are we bringing in, what are we teaching them? Then there's what are we asking them to do? And that's where the STEP Act comes in. And I'll come back to that. So do we want mental health professionals responding to someone experiencing a mental health crisis or someone dealing with homelessness? Or do we want police responding to that? And I think, obviously, I'm in the camp of we've asked over time, our police to do too much. And I think many officers I've talked to agree with that. Everything from the cat in the tree to the double homicide and everything in between, to traffic. And we've layered on and layered on. And they're not necessarily the most appropriate or most qualified to handle those issues. And we've not made investments in other areas like mental health and substance abuse and home and services to end and prevent homelessness, et cetera, recreation, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're in this moment of, well, where police should they spend most of their time and be most effective? And I think the STEP Act is in that bucket. And the third is on robust accountability and transparency. So how do we make sure we have the data, you have the data, we have the data as policymakers to look at what is or is not happening. When someone does do something that's not appropriate, that there is accountability and that it's done in a public way so that the public knows that the deep power, the vast powers that we vest in our police to keep us safe, the power to detain liberty, to take life in some circumstances, that power has the appropriate checks on it. And obviously, we've had a nationwide, worldwide debate on what that is, and we're still not there. But we have taken steps in Montgomery County. We passed the comprehensive use of force bill, that parts of which were used at the state level to pass the state bill. And so robust transparency and accountability. So those are the three buckets. And I've been doing work in all three, as has the council. But this one, the STEP Act, and I just feel like context is important for everything, is in the bucket of what should police be doing with their time and how should they be spending it and what are the appropriate functions of police. And there's obviously a ongoing discussion about traffic in the context of that. And a couple years ago, the OLO report that came out, I had asked OLO to do that report, to look into our traffic, because our own office, we had done some digging on our own through the traffic stops, but we wanted to make sure we got it right. And we asked OLO to look into it, and that produced the report that you all have seen. That was part of the impetus for suggesting that we take a different direction as far as police involved in low-level traffic offenses. And I front loaded, but I'll just run through the bill in the next 5 minutes and then we'll do questions. So this bill would do a couple of things. It would, and it's the Safety and Traffic Equity and Policing Act. It will help address racial disparities in traffic stops, which are either growing or the same as in our county. They're vast, particularly in some of the areas that this bill addresses. And I believe it would allow law enforcement to focus on the more serious types of traffic offenses that are producing deaths on our roadways: speeding, drunk driving, reckless driving, running red lights, etc. All the moving violations, which are not touched at all by this bill. Just to be clear, no moving violation is stopped. And any secondary violation that this bill does limit, it is limited only in the context of that it's the primary offense. So low-level non-moving violations. It also limits consensual searches. I'll talk about that in a second. And it requires more robust data collection and reporting on traffic stops. One of the issues, many issues we find, we still have a lack of data in some areas. So if someone is pulled over and they're given 6 tickets, we're not able to tell in a reliable way about why they were pulled over in the first place, or what was the initiation of which ticket or which violation. So it requires some of those things to be corrected. This is also an opportunity, I believe, to make our roads more safe, and focus again through Vision Zero, our effort on these traffic violations that are producing unsafe roadways. It does not prohibit officers from stopping people who are speeding, driving while under the influence, not wearing seat belts, which are the biggest drivers of fatalities. Would allow our enforcement to focus on serious traffic violations and other crimes. Another part of this is, I think we should be having our police focus on the most serious violent crimes and not on these low-level offenses. There are people who are better positioned to deter and address them, and they produce, in a lot of cases, drastic disparities and unfortunate interactions that can sometimes lead to the dire consequences. The last thing I'll say, well, this was introduced on the same day that Councilmember Glass introduced, and I'm a co-sponsor, the Safe Streets Act, which I think you talked about at your last meeting. I think these bills are consistent. This is about keeping people safe on our roadways. And I think you'll hear that in the public testimony on this bill on the 25th from organizations like the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, which is in support of this bill, and others that are in the kind of more traditional traffic safety zone of things, which is one of the key arguments that is actually set against this bill, but I don't think bears out in the data.
Councilmember, I want to just help you keep track of the time.
Yeah, thank you. And this is my last thing. We are we're not the only one that are trying to do this. The state of Virginia in 2020 passed a similar bill, the whole state. I would encourage you to look at that bill. You cannot, a police officer in the state of Virginia cannot pull someone over as a primary offense for license plate illumination, defective, unsafe equipment, brake lights, window tinting, objects from the dash, from the rear view mirror, all things that are in my bill. City of Philadelphia has passed a similar bill. So I'll stop there and take questions.
Well, thank you very, very much. I encourage members of the PAC then to signal that they're raising their hand on the reaction tab at the bottom of their screen. And I wanted to, I think Robin, who's sort of been sort of our lead person on this, if he has some questions, and then I'll recognize Sherry. I'd recognize Ty and then Sherry. So Robin, yeah, go ahead, Robin.
Sure. Hi, Will. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for your work on this. As you know, the PAC produced a report that's broadly in line with your recommendations. It offers some more detail on some of the issues that you've raised. I guess the most sort of the part that is most difficult and that may cause the most difficulty for the bill is the notion that in some cases, some of the things that you have listed, some of the minor offenses that you've listed may be true safety violations, right? They may actually be dangerous. And I wonder how you would sort of square that particular circle. What if somebody's driving without lights? What if both somebody's brake lights are out? You know, these are dangerous things to be doing in the night, in the rain. So what do you want the police officer to do, and what would he be allowed to do, or they be allowed to do?
I'm sorry, I thought I was muted. Thanks, Robin. So I'll be concise with my answer since I was a little verbose in my introduction. So one, just to be clear, you could have one tail light out, one headline out. You couldn't have both out, right? Okay. So that's what the bill allows. I agree. That's not, we don't want, the idea is not that you encourage people to drive around with lights out. There are a number of ways. We're looking into a number of ways. This is a conversation starter, by the way. Mm-hmm. I'm open to amendments, right? And I've heard, this is one I've heard a lot about from the people who are generally in support of the bill about the lights. So that could be something that we look into. I don't think, that is not the main driver of these stops.
Sure.
The taillights are different than the headlights, I would say. Yeah. And so again, the bill allows one lamp out. Obviously, we don't want people to do that. The other thing is we've talked to Department of Transportation and others, and we're working with some state officials there are certain things like registration, which I didn't talk about, which is in the bill, where you could use current parking ticket technology to issue registration violations, vehicles that are parked. So we're having conversations about that and about how that could be used. And again, just a reminder, if you're careening on the road or speeding or run a red light or anything with any of these things, you can still be pulled over and ticketed for these things, or issued a repair order. So this is, again, you just can't be stopped as a primary violation. And so I think, again, conversation starter, open to talking about things like the lighting. I don't think, and I've asked for this data, that if you look at traffic fatalities, we had 36 or so. I don't want to get it wrong, but somewhere around that number of pedestrians or people killed in crashes last year. I am not aware of any of them being related to a headlamp being out.
Right.
They're related to speeding. They're related to reckless driving. They're related to not yielding, also all things that would not be touched by this bill at all. And so I think that's something we just need. You're a data guy. I think we need to, you can what if your way to anything.
Sure.
So I just think that's something.
Thank you. Ty?
Thank you, Councilman, for being with us this evening. I appreciate it. Good to see you, Ken.
Good to see you too.
My question or concern I should have is regarding consent searches, and that's something that you mentioned during your opening statement that you were going to get into. And I know that consent searches have been a very useful tool in policing in terms of, I know it's more of an intuitive thing, and I know that it can be nuanced sometimes. So I guess my question is, what effect do you see it having on police officers being able to effectively policed? And also, would it be better if it was more codified in terms of specific language meted out that police officers would have to state in order to gain consent for such a search?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ty. And again, I'll say, as I said to Robin, it's a conversation starter. I do know there's an issue here, though, and I've heard from many people who have reached out, who have been pulled over for something low level, and then are asked to, if their car can be searched. There's a massive power imbalance. I don't have to tell you that, in between the officer, the armed officer, and the resident, who's asked this question. And then they sit on the curb for an hour while their car is searched, and they feel demoralized, and then nothing's found. They go home and are supposed to feel great about living in the county. That's not good. And but to your point, what the bill does, it says that if you have probable cause that the crime has been committed, under the laws of the state and the Constitution, you can search the Fourth Amendment. You can search the vehicle. This just says you can't go on a fishing expedition. So if probable cause is not a good enough standard, we should change that standard. But we shouldn't just be able to say to whoever we want, hey, I want to search your vehicle. And so the resident, to your point of language, the third point you made, again, I'm open to, maybe there is a way to allow something to be said in a way, or language to be presented that lowers that power imbalance, and that really emphasizes what is the law, that you can deny a search if there isn't probable cause. But I will tell you that most people don't feel that way when they're asked, and it's not asked in that way. So there might be a way to standardize that language. So I think that's an interesting suggestion, to try to split the dual purpose. One of the things the Virginia bill did, and we're going to have to deal with in Maryland too, is the 2020 bill. It does not allow the smell of marijuana to be a reason to initiate a search. It prohibits that. This bill does not address that, but it's something coming down the pike, and it's kind of a similar thing. It's because you think this person looks out of whack for whatever reason, I'm going to ask you to search. So I'm open to that, but I put it in there because I think it is an issue in certain communities, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
And just one footnote on that, police, if they have the probable cause, they can conduct the search. And then if they have reasonable suspicion, they can ask to conduct the search. So that is in there if there's reasonable suspicion of a criminal offense occurring. So this is really to stop, hey, can I search your car? And kind of just that happening in an everyday situation. And we hope that doesn't happen, but it's here articulating that if it's a reasonable suspicion, it's still okay to ask for that consent.
I appreciate you saying that, Marisa, because the probable cause is a higher standard. The reasonable suspicion is a lower standard. So you can search if you have probable cause anytime. If there's reasonable suspicion, which is lower than probable cause, you can ask. I think Cherie was next.
Sherry Branson. Welcome, Sherry. Welcome back after your sojourn with the Planning Commission. It's good to see you again. Thank you for rejoining us.
Thank you. It's good to see you all. I have a couple of questions. The PAB, Police Accountability Board, had a meeting, I guess it was last week. And this bill came up. There were a lot of questions about this, Councilmember Jawando. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to address one of the concerns that was raised at that meeting. And then I have a question about the technology. So it's twofold. One, first is my question about the technology. I think your concern about, what's the primary reason for the stop is a good one. I think it's a great one. I'm wondering whether there currently is technology in the ticket writing, however they do that, to indicate what the primary reason for the stop may have been if the police end up, doing, writing, tickets for several infractions, especially if, this is, if the goal is to get at these pretextual stops. That's number one. And the concern that was brought up at the PAB, which I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak to, if you like, is jurisdiction. Whether the county council actually has jurisdiction to pass this kind of bill.
Yeah.
As you may know, the NAACP wrote the county executive shortly after he was sworn in, and asked him to make it a policy for the police to stop these pretextual stops. He didn't seem to think he could do that. So there you are. So those are my questions. Thank you. Again,
Sure.
Thank you for being here.
No, thank you, Sheree, and welcome back. So I'll go reverse order. Yes, I think the legal footing is sound. As I pride myself as a lawyer, I'm always checking on that. Obviously, our council attorneys and the county attorney, though there's not precedent for it, believe that we do have the authority to exceed, to create rules for our police that utilize this level of discretion. We did check into that. Just like anything, it could be challenged, but I feel sound from the advice of our attorneys that it is within our legal authority to do. And was it
So
by-
let me just, as I understand it, the state law doesn't prohibit it, but it doesn't prevent it either. I mean, is that an accurate way
Yeah,
to say it?
that's right.
Kind of
It
this
doesn't.
gray
it doesn't-
area.
I think that's right. We're not preempted, but there is a delegation of powers kind of presumption. If it doesn't speak to it, that you can act. We're not preempted from doing it.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then the other part of my question.
Yeah, the technology, and I see Captain Dillman chiming in, he's chiming in, it was correcting me, thank you. On the number of collisions was 46, not 36. Or number of deaths on the roadways. The technology, as I understand it, is that you cannot, that they don't know how, or it doesn't enable the law enforcement to distinguish which is the primary offense. So others, if they know better than that, they can speak up, but I watched the public safety hearing when this was discussed. So yeah, I think Captain Dillman might be able to speak to that. I just know we're not getting it now. So maybe it can be done with current technology. Yeah, so I'll let Captain Brian, you want to chime in on that one?
Robin, can you hold off then for a moment so we can recognize Captain Dillman to
Sure.
respond? Thank you. Captain Dillman, you're recognized.
Good evening, thank you. And yes, the technology end, I think it's important for everyone to know that is not a Montgomery County problem or issue. Well, it is a problem because you guys want the data and we get that. The problem is it's state database, ETICS. When an officer makes a traffic stop, they put in the reasons for the traffic stops. If they have multiple offenses, what happens is it will default to the first entry. So that's the problem. If an officer is writing multiple citations or warnings or an equipment repair order, the system itself defaults to the first one. So it might not be the primary reason, it's just one of the reasons. We have addressed this with the state. Unfortunately, we have next to no authority, obviously, with how the state utilizes its database. So that is a glitch in the system that we unfortunately do not have the ability to change. We have brought that to their attention. So hopefully everyone understands that. So what's listed in the ETICS database very well may not be the primary reason for the stop.
Right, appreciate that.
If I could just interject, it would strike me it's a potential problem that could be addressed by training if officers wrote the first offense as the primary reason that could address that particular data question? Would that be a training issue that could be addressed, Captain Dillman?
It is something that we're looking into because that could be a potential remedy to it. But we're looking into that.
Thank you.
Eric, there was an extensive discussion of it at the OLO, the public safety work session on the OLO report. I know Captain Dillman, I believe, was there, and so if you want more on that, you can look at that recording.
Thank you. I'll do that. Thank you very much, Marissa. Robin and then Vernon.
Thank you. Two things. One would be, I wonder about the data on traffic stops. As far I don't think there are any data on stops that were requested and not permitted. And I'm not sure about how good the data are on stops that were permitted and the outcomes from those stops. So I'd be interested in any comments from Captain Dillman or elsewhere about what we know about traffic stops in the county. We know that weapons are sometimes found, that's true. But we don't know perhaps a lot about some of the other stops. And I guess I would say, I would follow up Eric's point and say, okay, so police department is looking into this, and here we have seems, as Eric pointed out, a pretty simple, direct training solution that says you just put the reason you stopped it in as the first reason. How long does the police department anticipate studying this? Thanks.
To your point, Robin, about how long, that's going to be up to the Police Training Academy, so I cannot speak on their behalf. I will have further conversation with Captain Clark to further discuss this. In terms of your first part, I'm not quite sure I understand your question in terms of data outcomes.
Sorry, I think it's important for us to know a bit more about the circumstances of traffic stops. Not traffic stops, but searches. It's unclear to me whether the current data contains information about why a search was requested. And it's certainly true, I think, that if the driver refuses a search, that there's no record of that. So we don't know how many searches are requested in general. So
Yeah,
I
no,
guess,
there's no, I don't know. Captain Dillon could correct me, but I don't think either one of those things is tracked. Like why you request the search, and obviously unless you search and find something, then there's something that's written, like the case of drugs or
Right.
a weapon.
Is-
But the searches that don't turn up anything, I don't know if those are recorded, and I haven't seen anything to demonstrate that they're recorded.
yeah, so it seems to me quite likely, if those things are true, and I don't know, that the number of searches is drastically understated in the data. So it would be helpful to know if searches that don't find anything are tracked and searches that are requested but not approved are tracked.
One thing I can tell you in the e-tics, if a vehicle is searched, there is a tab in there that the officer indicates that the search was conducted. So that there is a database to indicate whether or not a vehicle was searched. If there was an arrest as a result of that, that is also captured in e-tics. So it is there. And you guys also have to understand too, we have departmental requirements and departmental directives on body-worn cameras. So body-worn cameras on every traffic stop are in fact activated. So those requests for consent to search or probable cause searches, Terry frisk, whatever, they're all captured on our body-worn cameras as well.
But they're not necessarily captured in the data themselves.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'd like to make sure that Vernon Ricks has a chance to ask his question, make his comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am one who's not in favor of silly stops, like whether you got dice hanging from the mirror or that kind of thing. But I am concerned about the fact that when I see a car whose windows are so tinted that, I mean, they act like mirrors. You know, you can't see anything in the car. A lot of, when I was in the military, a lot of defensive driving was being able to observe the other individuals who you were in traffic with. And so I'm concerned when I go, when like I'm on the street and it's pouring down, raining so bad that you can't see. And here's a person driving along with no lights. And and they gotta have windshields. And I understand, I heard you say that the law says that 2 lights out, they can stop you, or 1 light, no. But there are a lot of safety issues that I see people committing concerns that may fall under, hey, I can't make the stop. And it's subjective on the part of the officer. Is that not right?
Well, the way the bill is written, and good to see you, Mr. Ricks,
Good to see you too.
These things that are listed in the bill, which are enumerated, cannot be the reason for a primary stop. So the primary reason for a stop. So it's not subjective in the sense that under current law, it's subjective. Like you can pull over, there's the discretion, you know, obviously everyone who has a taillight out is not pulled over, and everyone who has a out-of-date registration is not pulled over. So there is discretion currently. This would make it that if this is the only reason you're pulling someone over, that can't be the only reason. Now, if they're veering in and out, or if they're speeding or doing other things, moving violations, you absolutely can pull them over. But this would say that for these things, it can't be the primary reason.
Yeah, and you know, I was, you know, we had the incident not too long ago where they pulled over a guy and he had fentanyl falling out of the car and firearms and stuff. And I mean, I don't know what the primary thing is, but say, for example, if he was sitting there smoking a joint and the joint was making me high over in my car at the stoplight, you know, do you pull him over or do you let him go and find nothing? Because he could have a ton of pot and stuff in the back of the car, whatever. So there's some things about it that I have some real concerns about.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. I just wanted to make sure that Ruhama, you have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, or Jen, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Captain Dillman?
Yeah, Vernon, thank you for your concern. I mean, I could go on forever. As you guys, no secret to any of you, we strongly, as a police department, oppose this bill for a multitude of reasons that I could spend hours talking to you about. But Vern brings up a very good thing. When we say one of our goals is to assist in our Vision Zero, one of the things we do is with distracted driving, our biggest ability to be able to do that is to be able to make enforcement efforts from the center median or something, from the sidewalk, and make observations in that car. Are they on a cell phone? Do they have the occupants restrained? Do they have a child that is unrestrained in the car? Various different things to contribute to public safety that, with windows tinted, creates a problem enforcing that. Not only the safety hazards that we have as police officers approaching that vehicle then. So there are a lot of issues, but since Vernon, you brought up the window tinting concern, that's very much one of ours as well. And when it comes to equipment violations, it's important.
Captain, can I interrupt you for a second? And this might be a moment where I could ask Councilmember Jawando or his staff a specific question regarding window tinting. Do we have data about how widespread window tinting as a basis for a stop might be? Is this an area where there's any evidence there's a particularly disparate type of enforcement, or might this be a potential compromise area in which the window tinting section was removed from the bill?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, I don't know if it was this group or I don't know if you heard from Chief Jones or it was the PAB that heard from Chief Jones. Which one was it, Marisa?
I think last week at the PAB or before it was Chief Jones. Yeah.
Got it. I will answer that question, Eric, but I will also say that in the places that this is passed, there are law enforcement that support it. And so I just, in Philadelphia and state of Virginia, we will have people testify from law enforcement that support this as a way to improve traffic safety. So while our police department has taken this, position, which isn't necessarily consistent with the county executive's position, there is law enforcement that is on the other side of this. The other thing, but on the window tinting, this whole thing is a conversation starter. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's an important conversation to have. Anytime you want to change something and reallocate who does what, because it's not necessarily achieving the goals. To your point, I think, again, if you go to those 46 fatalities on our roadways, window tinting, I haven't gone through every one, but I don't think window tinting is among them. But is there an open question about whether that should be left in and there might be a compromise on that? Sure. There are disparity scores, and I don't have it on the top of my head, so I won't try to quote it, but I'll ask Marisa to dig it up in the OLO report or either in the underlying data. The things that we included that were the things that had the higher disparity scores, which meant that there were African-American, particularly African-American male, but African-American Latino drivers that were pulled over disproportionately for these offenses. And so there is a relationship to what's in the bill to the disparity score, which is in the OLO report. I just don't remember what it is for window tinting, if that is called out. And we can link to that or get you that answer, but there is generally, that was one of the guiding principles in drafting the bill was the disparity score.
Thank you. Captain Dillman, I apologize for interrupting. Was there another point that you wanted to make?
Where do you want me to begin, to be honest with you? Yeah, I mean,
Well, I want you to begin with your most important point.
well, I think we keep talking about an OLO report. The OLO report is flawed by its very essence. If you talk to anyone that does research, they'll tell you that you can't do census data analysis. And one thing the OLO does not address at all is it doesn't address two main things. Is there's no way of capturing, did the officer in fact know the race of the subject when they pulled them over? And I would say a vast majority of traffic stops, you don't. Most of our traffic stops are in fact for speeding. Speeding, most of them are done by laser. Laser most of the time is done from a distance. And you don't know the race of the driver most of the time when you're making those stops. The second thing, the OL does not take into consideration is behaviors. And so we don't know are certain demographics more prone to certain driving behaviors that they're being pulled over. So again, we're trying to make a law based on a very fundamentally flawed report that has not come out and said that officers are disproportionately stopping people because of any type of bias. Is it in fact because of their driving behavior is creating a situation where they're being stopped? And I can tell you, I put in there, we had 46 fatalities last year. And those 46 fatalities, 84.8% of the individuals that died as a result of these accidents were non-white. We look at this year's numbers. We have 11 fatalities. 9 of those 11 fatalities, or 81.8%, are non-white drivers. We have 4 pedestrians, all of color, that have been struck and killed. So I would ask people on this panel, what is it that we're trying to do? And who is it that we're trying to protect? Because we're trying to protect and ensure the safety of the public. We need to get to the root cause, and by limiting traffic enforcement is not going to get us there. I've told you guys previously that in 2019, we had 106,080 traffic stops. Last year, we were under 36,000. In that same, so it's a decrease of 68% in traffic stops, but our fatalities in the same period of time were up 33%. Less traffic stops is not going to make people safer, and in particular, people of color. So I think these are important facts. And I think if we're going to take public safety seriously, which I have no doubt everyone on this call does, but how we get there is what we have to have serious and honest conversations about. And limiting traffic stops is not going to get us there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and Eric, I wasn't aware that we were having a debate tonight, but it's turned into that, and I just have to correct several things that Captain Dillman said that are incorrect. The first, that we don't use census data. Policymakers use census data all the time in a variety of ways to make decisions. People experiencing homelessness, you have to compare. We use the number that the vast majority are African-American men, for example, over 60%, 80% are families that are Black that are experiencing homelessness compared to their census data. We do a lot of things based on census data. There is a broad amount of research out there that says that that is a absolutely acceptable proxy to make policy based on census data, because that's what you have. So, and we do it, if it's good in other areas, it's absolutely good in this area. And so that is just completely false, that first point. The second thing is that, again, we want to reduce traffic fatalities. This is a part of that solution, but we also want to reduce discrimination either on purpose or because of the way the policy is implemented. This is not about individual officers being racist or not. That is not my concern. It's the policies that produce the outcomes. And I know you all get that. And I've tried to express that to the law enforcement who we met with on this bill. And I've tried to do it in other areas. If it is producing a disproportionate response, we have to investigate why it's doing that and not say, well, maybe these folks just drive worse, which was also suggested there, which I think is totally inappropriate. So I think that's the core of this. And, I think that's what we need to be focused on.
Thank you, Council Member. Robin or Sherry, did you have questions or?
Yes, I did.
Council Member.
Actually, it's a really a comment mostly in support of Will's points. First, if you refuse to use the census data, then you can never do any analysis in this area. So it is disingenuous completely to say that you can't rely on census data. You have to rely on census data because, as Will said, that's what there is. And if you don't want to rely on it, then what you're really saying is you don't want to do the analysis. And this brings me to the second point, which is Chief Jones came to the PAC and was asked quite directly whether he planned to do any analysis of racial disparities in traffic stops. And he said no. If you don't want to do the analysis, then it's very hard to take credibly arguments about how important the current pattern of traffic stops are. And we have written a long and detailed set of arguments to which the police department has not responded at all.
I would just add my perception, having come to the council fairly recently, hearing the argument at the public safety work session that there needs to be different data, more data, something different than the OLO report. Okay, but hearing that again and again over the course of months, then the question is, well, what is the police department providing in terms of the other data? And what are the other questions being asked? Or what if these aren't the right ways to get at the core motivations for this bill, then what are they? Because in jurisdictions all over the country, this conversation is happening and police departments are coming to the table as part of the solution and working together with legislators on, okay, well, maybe we can't do X and Y, but we can do Z. And so as a resident of this county, I would ask, where is the, that this be a comprehensive and conversation amongst our community. It's not one-sided. Not one person has every answer to this, but it's a complicated conversation that's happening all over the country, and it needs to be just thoughtfully entertained.
Shuri?
Very-
Yeah, let me just say that on the data issue, the county uses and spends a lot of money for a disparity analysis every 5 years to determine its procurement practices. And that disparity study tells the county where there are disparate impacts in government contracting, precise industries, precise groups of people. The disparate impact analysis that the county undertakes to make that determination has been okayed by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, in doing government contracting that you basically had to have a disparity study, which takes into account racial data that is drawn from a given area to come up with what a race-based corrective program should be. So I think if the Supreme Court said you can use this data, then that should be good enough for Montgomery County. It is a widely accepted use of data. Okay. So this argument that the census data is somehow deeply flawed kind of flies in the face of what Supreme Court said you could do with this same data in other areas. So that's not a good thing to say. That's number one. But let me ask my question. My questions are these. There was noted a decrease in traffic stops. I think you said from 106,000 to 36,000 or something. I'm wondering if we can get that precise, the precise numbers, please. And over the course of time that occurred. I mean, is this a COVID phenomenon or is this something else? And secondly, I'm just wondering how much money, because I've never heard anybody say, how much money does the county get from tickets that are issued from these traffic stops? And has anyone done a determination of I guess you haven't, if there's no way to separate the pretextual from anything else. So Susan is saying that all the fines go to the state, and so the county doesn't benefit from this financially in any way. Is that accurate, Susan?
No, the state does give us money that goes into the general fund at some point, but the police department does not benefit directly from this.
So can we get that number? I would like to know how much money we turn over to the state and how much money the state turns back to us. If it's the general fund, doesn't matter. I mean, money is fungible. Money is fungible. So that really doesn't matter. So can we get that number, those numbers, please?
yes, I'll try to see what I can get from the state.
Thank you.
And I saw on the traffic stops that was put in, those are the numbers I saw too from Captain Dillman. The one of the things that, although I don't know what 2020 and 2021 are obviously a little off because of the pandemic. But there are still disparities within the 35,000 too. So just to note.
Thank you for that question, Sherry, and the discussion about the data. I think the thrust of our conversation this evening was to ask about the bill that council member has introduced. Did anyone have any questions about the bill as drafted or its provisions that they had questions about?
And Eric, while you're teeing that up, I just wanted to say, because I'd be derelict if I didn't, the bill also provides for, you cannot stop someone for jaywalking. And that's important for a lot of reasons. That, we can put some data in there, but there's a lot of people who are pro Vision Zero and other, you shouldn't be criminalizing people trying to cross built highways. That one of the reasons Black and brown people die the most. And when I introduced the resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, I listed that the data that was mentioned by Captain Dillman, which is true every year, that it's people who are Black and brown who are using public transportation, who are most low income, who are immigrant, who are the victims of crashes. It's because in large part, the built environment where there aren't crosswalks, there aren't walkable communities, there isn't access to transit, there's mega highways that people have to cross. And that leads to this. And so you certainly don't want to be criminalizing people trying to make, you want to obviously encourage better built environment and people to cross safely, but you don't want to criminalize or that activity. And so I just wanted to mention that that's in the bill as well. And there's also examples that I've heard from, there was an example, a high profile example in the county a couple of years ago where there were some young people walking, as you know, and living in Montgomery County, a lot of our streets don't have sidewalks. And they were walking down the street that had sidewalk on one side, then it didn't have it on both sides. And they were stopped by our police department and asked what they were doing. They were run through a system called AFIS, which is a fingerprinting system that scans to see if you have any outstanding warrants. And I still haven't been able to get the question on where that data goes. I think it's some sort of federal system. I don't even think it's actually constitutional to just stop people and scan them like that, but that's another issue. But they were stopped primarily because they were walking in the middle of the road, and they didn't have ID on them because they were young people and were scanned. So there are other reasons you don't want to allow that. I think that activity is a primary reason to stop someone as well.
Are there other questions? Ruhama, I see your hand. Thank you for joining us this evening.
I don't think we can hear you, Ruhama.
You'll need to speak louder if you can. Ruhama, we can't hear you.
Maybe she can put a question in the text.
Yep.
Thank you, Ruhama. We'll look for it in the text.
While we're waiting, I guess I would just suggest to Councilmember Jawando and Marisa that they look again at the long series of detailed recommendations on traffic that we offered a couple of years ago. I think you'll find some useful pieces in that.
Absolutely.
While we're waiting on her, can I just ask a quick question?
Yes, I'm sorry, Vernon, I didn't see your hand. Your hand blends into the background.
That's the way a brown hand is all the time.
It certainly, it would be clear on a white background, let's say Logan's background, for example.
You just got a lesson in racial equality.
Yeah.
Yes, I
But
did.
anyway, to Will, on the jaywalking piece, when a person walks against a walk light, that's jaywalking, right?
I think, yeah, my understanding of that would be included in jaywalking, yeah. Within a cross stop, but against the light.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so if we took that out, I mean, what I have seen, the county itself built walls down the middle of streets with fences and all of that, and to keep people from crossing in other places. And yet I've seen them at crosswalks with traffic moving, walk on out in the middle of the street and get to the island and have to wait. So that's another concern that I think we need to look at how that would work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we're still waiting. Oh, there we go. Ruhama. But, you know, I think you suggested something, building those barriers is actually a good interim solution. And when you can't, you know, add more crosswalks and more safe places for people to cross to discourage that activity without, again, leading to a potential, you know, kind of criminal or misdemeanor type of situation. You know, we actually repealed a law a couple of years ago on bike registration for a similar reason. There was that you technically have to register. You did, not anymore, but you technically had to register your bicycles in order to ride a bicycle in Montgomery County, and you had to pay a fee. And it was weird. It went into like a police pension, like retirement fund or something. The money from it, it was a weird thing. And again, who's pulled over, who's stopped because they don't have bike registration and why. And we actually heard about a couple of cases where that was used as a pretext to stop them for something else. And again, I think these are not things that we need to be focusing on in that way. Now, I'm all for encouraging people to drive safety. Our DOT does a ton of that. Our Department of Transportation, there's other ways to have good education around where to cross while we improve the built environment. But again, I think at the end of the day, we shouldn't be criminalizing that activity. It looks like this bill was passed. How would the traffic stops include these offenses then be regulated? Would it be through the MVA, or are they no longer considered an offense? Okay, I appreciate Raham. I think I understand this. So one, just these are primary offenses. Again, if you're pulled over for speeding, which is, as was mentioned, is like the #1 thing people are pulled over for, which would not be prohibited by this bill at all. And in fact, I'm hoping more people will be pulled over for speeding and we do more electronic. That's one of the main drivers of crashes and fatalities, is that you can still be ticketed for or given a work repair order for other things that are in this bill. The other thing we're looking at, which I mentioned maybe before you got on, I found we had talked to our Department of Transportation that things like the registration stickers, there are non-law enforcement people, parking meter folks who issue parking tickets. That same technology, scan technology, can also do that for registration that's expired. That will be one example of something that we could potentially do to remove the registration issue, but still have enforcement of it in a non-law enforcement way. I think there's other things that could be done in some of the other areas that technology could potentially help with. But we need to work towards those. But again, it's not saying that these things cannot be ticketed at all. It's just they can't be primary offenses. So they still would be, it's not, they're not offenses. It's just they're not the primary reason for a stop. It's not, if that makes sense. Okay, and it does, because you typed it makes sense.
Good. Do any other members of the PAC have questions? Councilmember, we're very, very, very grateful that you've taken so much of your time upon coming back from your long, wonderful journey to Africa and to Nigeria. Are there other questions for Councilmember Jawando or his staff from members of the PAC?
Did you buy any new outfits while you're over there?
I was gifted some and I bought some. Yeah, you'll get to see them at some point. More importantly, my kids were. This was their first trip. As some of you know, my dad is from Nigeria. He's passed away, but that's what and this was their first trip going back. So they were very excited to go. I will say on this bill, if there's not any other questions, if there are, I'm happy to take them now or later. It was impossible. If anyone's ever been to any country that out of the US, particularly where there's not great infrastructure, the traffic environment is insane and so unsafe in like 1,000 different ways. It just reminded me of this is an important issue. It's not, but the fact that there are so many other things that are important for traffic safety that are not related to this bill. It was just underscored by, the complete lack of safety where in built environment and driving and speeding. And it's just a reminder that, I think it's easy in Montgomery County and Maryland in the US to make a mountain out of a molehill as we're trying to make incremental progress on these disparities. These things in this bill are not the driver of those 46 fatalities. They are the driver for a lot of people who look like me feeling bad about how they're interacting with law enforcement. And that's just a fact. And I don't think the enforcement of these as primary issues is producing safety. I think it's actually in a lot of cases producing lack of safety in the sense that feeling safe in your own community and your own skin. And I think we should be wanting to address that. And I know this group does, but trying to get that across to the public, I know it can be difficult, but I appreciate you all taking an interest. And again, it's a conversation starter. I worked on the Hill, I worked in White House. I know we got to negotiate. I just want someone to negotiate with. So I'm happy to work on it. Appreciate it.
Councilmember, thank you. And I just note on your observation about traffic fatalities worldwide. It was either a United Nations agency or maybe the Secretary General, the head of the World Health Organization, who just in the last few weeks said that fatalities in roads are a global health epidemic on the order of 300,000 deaths a year that can be addressed. And it just does reflect that we all share the concern about traffic safety from our own, from the little areas in which we all drive. And we really appreciate that that's a key driver of yours in introducing this legislation. So thank you very, very much for joining us.
Yeah, and tune in on April 25th in the evening if you haven't signed up to testify. Certainly, I think we have about 30 people signed up to testify in the evening on this bill from the public, and appreciate your engagement. And I'm assuming you guys will talk and figure out what you want to say about the bill at some point.
Yes. Thank you very, very much again. And Marissa, thank you very much for all your comments and insights this evening as well. Captain Dillman, were there any other key point? I saw your hand up. Is there something else that good night, Councilmember Marissa, of course, you're welcome to stay on until our adjournment in a little while.
Great. Thank you for having us.
We've obviously gone way over. We had made some requests for crime and arrest data, and we got a reply. Should we? With the limited amount of time we have available, I'm willing to sort of take direction from what the PAC wants to focus on in our remaining 15 minutes. Do we want to address the question of the sufficiency of the reply to our request for data? We want to continue discussing the STEP Act at this point. And perhaps Robin?
Yeah, I don't think we're ready to talk about the arrest data yet. I haven't had a chance to look through it. It's, you know, as usual, I think there's quite a lot of cleanup to do before it can be turned into something useful. So let's table that till next time.
Okay. So I think I mean, Susan points out, here's the question, is that between now and April 25th, on April 25th, there will be a Public Safety Committee hearing on the bill. Does the PAC have a position that it's ready to begin to, I mean, is this something we can discuss, that we can have a position that would feel fairly unified about?
Can I make a suggestion on this? I think this is quite tricky for us. We have a variety of different perspectives on the PAC. And this is a, you know, very specific set of legislation. I'm thinking that it might be better if we resubmitted the traffic stop findings and recommendations that we agreed, you know, some months ago. We take those, we transmit them with a letter that says that many of our findings and recommendations, but not all, are congruent with Council Member Jawando's bill. And then we have we presented our position, which is not identical to Will's, but is kind of supportive in general. I'm not sure that the PAC should be forced to make a decision, yay or nay, on this specific bill, especially as it's likely to get, you know.
So Robin, let's then take your suggestions, an informal suggestion, and
Yeah, for
members,
discussion.
you know, so, you know, if members want to take a minute to sort of outline their thoughts about how they think would be best for us to participate in the consideration of this legislation. I'm willing to hear from Vernon, from Ty, from Sherry, from Jen, from Ruhama. Anybody want to go first after?
I'll go first.
Well,
Ty, go ahead.
I agree with Robin in that there's a lot of things to take in consideration here, because a lot of the things that are in the bill are very nuanced. I think we talked about two things that are nuanced. We talked about the tinted windows that could certainly pose a safety to officers. And we also talked about the issues regarding consent and maybe codifying a specific language that the officers would be required to state prior to. And Councilman Jawando said that he was open to compromise on those particular issues specifically. So, you know, I think that it's something that the PAC should weigh in on, but I think we should make suggestions. For example, one of the things that is in my head is, because we're seeking best practices, and as the councilman noted, that these are things that have been adopted in Fairfax County and Philadelphia, we need to thoroughly read those and start looking at those results. And then we may want to consider also, maybe even if we supported it or not, if we support it, we may want to think about sunlighting it, or suggesting that it be sunlighted at a certain time, so we can evaluate its effectiveness and what has occurred over time.
Vernon, I thought you
Yeah.
started.
Yeah, I have some concerns about some of the safety issues that are in the bill that don't match up with what I consider as a part of the zero, whatever they call it, zero.
Vision Zero.
Yeah, and such as the jaywalking piece at crosswalks, and I mean, people step out in the curb, off the curb. We're supposed to stop at, you know, and they have crosswalks in the middle of roads in some cases, where people step off the curb and they see the traffic is running, costs,
So-
running very heavily. So,
Well, so aside from the details of, what's your general sense about how you think we might?
well, I don't think we are ready yet until some of the things get ironed out. Take a position.
Well, I mean, would you want to propose a position?
Not at this time, I don't.
Okay, Sherry, do you have thoughts that you'd like to share on this?
Yeah, I always have thoughts I want to share. So first of all, I would suggest that we do take a position to support the bill in principle, that we submit a document that outlines the recommendations, at least, of the traffic study we did, and that we that we may want to suggest some amendments to the bill. And people have already raised what those potential amendments could be. I don't think that us remaining silent is what we're here to do. It's just not what we're here to do. So that would be and I think we should also note in any written document we submit the difficulty we have had in getting data from Montgomery County Police Department, and some potential data reforms that they should make. I mean, that would be, I think, a 360 position that that we could take, and if we get the numbers on how much the county gets from the state, for traffic fines, I think that would be a document that was worthy of this body, and that would have heft and would contribute to the conversation. Because I think that's what we're here to do. I think we're here to contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way.
Robin?
So I kind of like what Sherry said. But I don't think we can do this on the fly. Susan has pointed out that the PSC's work session isn't until July 17th. So what I would suggest is that we take the recommendations from the study, circulate it to the PAC. That way we can discuss it in detail next time and decide what we want to do with it, whether we want to change some of the recommendations, whether we want to forward them on, and how they might play into our support or otherwise for the bill as it currently stands. Because I feel like we need more discussion on what we actually want, exactly as Sherry presented, before we can go putting our thumb on the scale.
Well, I think that I heard Ty, I heard Vernon also express sort of concern about specifics. We don't have specific language of our own yet in terms of potential amendments, and Vernon certainly, has some wariness about taking a position right now. It seems to me that the consensus of those who've spoken is that we take more time to begin to develop our own recommendation based on the study that we've already done on traffic, and that we discuss then at our next meeting sort of what we think might be the merits of compromises that we think would be appropriate with respect to pedestrians, window tinting, seeking consent for search. How do friends feel about that?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
I would second that.
Vernon?
Yeah, I can live with it.
Okay, Sherry?
Yeah, I just think we should remain silent.
Right. So perhaps we could say that we could perhaps write to the council for the hearing to say that we appreciated the opportunity to sort of meet with the council member, and we are taking our time to prepare a more detailed response that we're not ready to do for the April 25th hearing.
Eric, I had another question I would like to ask of Captain Dillman or Captain Flynn.
I want to get to your question. Are we comfortable then with that? Before we get to Captain Dillman, are we comfortable with that as the approach? Susan, is that something that we could send a short letter to say that we had this meeting, we had we had the opportunity to have a good dialogue, and we were in the process of formulating a response?
Yes, if you just agree in principle on that approach and vote on that, I can draft something up and send it to the committee.
Is there then a motion that we send a short letter to the Council Public Safety Committee that we had our conversation this evening, and we will be sending a more detailed analysis in good time for their work session in July?
Robert,
You want somebody who wanted to modify, somebody has a different motion in mind.
Robert asked that we make it to the full council instead of the public safety
I'm
committee.
sorry, certainly, of course.
I'm prepared to propose the motion as Eric masterfully presented it with the amendment that it go to the full council.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second that.
Is there further discussion of the proposed motion? The vote then is on the motion. Indicate in the chat if you vote aye, or if you're going to vote no. Let's see, so we're waiting to hear from, okay, it's a unanimous vote. All 6 present have voted in favor.
7.
Beg your pardon. Thank you, 7. Susan, perhaps you and I will consult, tomorrow about sort of finalizing such a letter. Is that okay?
Sure, I can draft something tonight and just send it to you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. Vernon, in the last minute, since we have Captain Dillman, I assume this is relevant to the subject, and we'll let you two have the last words.
Thank you, sir. Very quickly, when an officer writes a ticket for moving or whatever violation, do they determine the race of the person on the ticket, or how is that done?
It's usually done by what the officer's observations are versus actually asking them. So that's how that's captured. Interestingly enough, the 2 different things. Citations are one thing, and then accident reports. When accident reports, the Akers report, which is the state report, it has no block for race at all. So in terms of capturing data for fatalities and stuff like that, it is not captured on the state database either.
Okay, because I'm wondering how. I know that years ago, the NAACP had that thing against the police department and with the Justice Department. And I was served on the task force back then that Doug Duncan had put together. And there was a recommendation of these little handheld computers. That thing never worked.
The Palm Pilot.
Yeah, the Palm Pilot, that was the worst thing that could happen. So, but what I'm looking at in my mind is how can we really look at data with some specificity with it, such as if I identify as Black, but there are people who are Black, who are Hispanic, who not necessarily identify as Black. Or I could say to I know people who are Black, who are white as anybody else who is white. So, to me, there's some ambiguity on how we look at data. On the census even, they ask people to identify their race. At the elections, they don't have race on the elections. They have to do it by outside poll looking. So I'm just wondering how we can get really deep into that data. Because I understand you said that they don't, that's subjective really on how they identify.
Well, Vernon, I appreciate your question. I'm not sure that we have, Captain Dillman answered your question about what is captured in the databases. Sherry has a response to your general observation. Is it okay if we go to Sherry's response?
Fine. I'm just whoever. I just throwing it out.
Sherry?
Yeah, so I think we need to understand that race is a social construct, and that as a social construct, all that really matters is how one perceives the race of another. That's really the $64,000 question. And so if the police are noting racial identifications, then that's all that matters. That's the data that counts, right? Because race is a social construct. So the fact that the state does not have a box that records it is not really relevant to our undertaking. What is relevant is that the county does in fact have data that addresses this issue. So I don't think we need to necessarily go further. It doesn't, what matters is what the police see or think they see when they stop someone.
Sherry, thank you. Obviously, we could continue this very important discussion, but I'm not sure exactly how it will lead us to a resolution on the issues that are before us.
No, I'm not looking for a resolution tonight. I think we need to look into how we look at each other and how, as Sherry was just saying, people look at each other. That's it.
Thank you, Vernon. Thank you, Sherry. Robin, thank you very much. Ruhama, thank you for your question, and Jen as well. Logan and Susan, Zifa, thank you for your support. Our guests, thank you for joining us this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
You betcha. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to say that.
Robin moves to adjourn. Is there a second?
I second it.
Tommy seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Very good.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned until our meeting next month in May. And again, Susan, thanks very much for your support. And everyone be well.